There comes a moment often in silence when you finally realize you were never too much. You were just honest in a world that fears the truth. They didn't walk away because you were unworthy. They walked away because your presence revealed everything they were hiding. You spoke with sincerity. They responded with performance. You offered depth. They gave surface. But here's the thing about masks. They work for a while. They convince for a season. But time has a brutal loyalty to truth. And now the very life they tried to stage is beginning to crack. Their smiles are hollow, their stories don't match their control, fading. Because what's false eventually exhausts itself. While you, the one they left, doubted, mocked, you are still standing, not because life was kind to you, but because you refused to become like them. This is the story of what happens when the real one endures. And the masked ones run out of places to hide. Authenticity costs more but pays in the end. There is a quiet weight to authenticity that most people never speak of. In a culture obsessed with appearance, image, and performance, being genuine is often seen not as a virtue but as a vulnerability. And yet, you chose that road. You chose not to water yourself down for approval. You chose not to package your emotions for likes or filter your truth just to make others comfortable. That choice came with consequences, real ones. You probably found yourself isolated, misunderstood, mislabeled. It's strange how people who lie, who manipulate, who play roles can be so socially accepted, even celebrated. Meanwhile, you, for simply speaking plainly, for living sincerely, were told you were too intense, too sensitive, too much. But you weren't too much. You were just clear. And clarity in a foggy world feels like a threat to those who rely on confusion. Authenticity is costly because it demands that you refuse the easy route. You don't get to blend in when you're real. You don't get to ride the wave of every trend, every fake apology, every emotionally empty compliment. You actually mean what you say. And that alone unsettles people whose entire life is built on a polished mask. They'll smile at you, maybe even praise you in public, but deep down, your presence makes them uncomfortable because it forces them to feel the hollowness of their own. What many don't realize is that pretending requires energy too. A lot of it. Keeping a facade is exhausting, even if it looks effortless on the surface. And eventually it breaks. It always does. The same charm that once attracted others begins to crack under scrutiny. The stories stop aligning, the words sound rehearsed. And those who relied on performance begin to burn out, while those who lived in truth, even if bruised, begin to rise stronger than ever. You may have lost people, friends, relationships, jobs, opportunities, all because you wouldn't pretend to be someone you're not. That loss hurt deeply, but it was also a filter. The things and people that fell away weren't yours to keep if they couldn't accept the real you. If their loyalty depended on you shrinking, then their exit was not your tragedy, it was your liberation. There's also a quiet strength that builds in a person who endures rejection without changing their core. While others reshape themselves to fit the moment, you stayed rooted. That doesn't mean you didn't question yourself. That doesn't mean you didn't sit awake at night wondering if honesty is worth the heartbreak. You did, and you still chose truth. That's resilience most people don't talk about. And let's be honest, authenticity is lonely, especially in the beginning. When you first take off the mask and start living from the heart, you find that most of the world doesn't meet you there. You find that honesty often echoes into silence, but that silence builds something unshakable. You start to realize that your peace doesn't come from validation. It comes from knowing you are not playing a role. You are not betraying yourself. And in a world so quick to sell its soul for attention, that's rare. The reward for authenticity is not immediate applause. It's not a crowd clapping for your truth. The reward is a life that doesn't collapse under pressure because it's not built on illusion. The reward is relationships that are real, where you're not loved for a mask, but for the raw, sometimes messy, but always sincere version of who you are. You'll notice over time that the people who once seemed so ahead, so admired for their charisma or image, begin to struggle under the weight of their own fiction. You'll see their words lose power. You'll see their eyes stop matching their tone. That's what happens when people build an identity on what pleases others instead of what's honest. Meanwhile, you'll grow more solid, not perfect solid. You'll stop needing to be liked in every room. You'll stop explaining yourself to those who don't listen. And most importantly, you'll stop chasing people who only stayed around when you performed for their comfort. The cost of being real is steep, yes, but the cost of being fake is your soul. And while one leads to temporary acceptance, the other leads to long-term peace. You chose the path with scars instead of smiles. You chose meaning over manipulation. And that decision, though it hurt at first, will be the foundation of everything strong, everything true, and everything lasting in your life. They may have worn masks and gained attention, but you wore truth and now you carry freedom. They wore masks because truth was too heavy for them. Not everyone avoids the truth because they are wicked. Many avoid it because it's too heavy for them to carry. It demands confrontation with self, with past, with conscience. And for some, the confrontation is unbearable. So they reach for something lighter, a mask, a role, a version of themselves that's easier to manage, easier to accept, and easier to present to the world. Masks are not always obvious. They can look like politeness, like humor, like charm. They can come wrapped in good intentions and flowery words. But underneath, they serve one purpose: to protect a person from being fully seen, to hide the parts of them that are afraid, ashamed, or unfinished. You saw through that, and that made you a mirror. When you're real, when you speak plainly, love honestly, and walk with integrity, you don't just interact with people. You expose them. Not by accusation, not by force, but simply by contrast. Your truth made their pretense uncomfortable. Your consistency made their contradictions harder to ignore. That's why they distanced themselves, why they pulled away, why they eventually had to reject you. It was never about your flaws. It was about what your presence made them feel about their own. People who wear masks need others who will pretend with them. They need agreement, not honesty. They surround themselves with people who keep the illusion alive, who will flatter their ego, enable their habits, and never challenge their script. But when someone like you shows up, someone who refuses to play along, it disrupts the entire act. It's easier to say you're too much than to say I'm not enough for this kind of honesty. It's easier to label you as difficult than to admit that their life has been a performance. But deep down they know. They know they weren't showing up fully. They know they weren't loving you from a place of integrity. They knew the mask was slipping long before it cracked, and still they clung to it. Because the mask had become safer than truth. The mask got them applause, approval, acceptance. Truth that demanded they change. That demanded they own the harm, the cowardice, the silence. There's a certain sadness to this realization. You probably tried to reach them. You gave grace. You extended patience. You explained things that didn't need explaining, trying to bridge the gap between what was real and what was being hidden. But you can't force someone to carry the weight of truth before they're ready. You can't drag someone into self-awareness. They have to choose it. And some never will. Some people are so deeply attached to the version of themselves they present that they'll destroy anything that threatens to reveal what's behind it. Even love, even friendship, even the very thing they secretly long for: connection without conditions. What you offered, emotional honesty, vulnerability, depth, wasn't rejected because it was wrong. It was rejected because it required more than they were ready to give. It's a strange pain to be left not because you failed, but because you were too real for someone who wasn't ready to meet themselves yet. But here's the truth: masks always come off. Life sees to it. It may not happen immediately, and it rarely happens publicly, but eventually reality will press hard enough. Circumstances will reveal the disconnect. Relationships will strain under the weight of unspoken truths. The mask that once protected will begin to suffocate. And in those quiet moments when applause fades and performance no longer works, life will hold up a mirror. They'll see what they lost, not just in you, but in themselves. They'll feel the emptiness behind their laughter, the hollowness in the validation they chased. And they'll remember the one person who saw them and didn't run. The one person who asked for honesty, not perfection. This is why you don't need to seek revenge or force closure. Life does the unmasking far better than you ever could. Life has a way of revealing character in time, both yours and theirs. And when it does, your role is not to gloat. It's to continue walking in the truth they couldn't carry, because your peace was never tied to their acceptance. Your clarity was never dependent on their agreement. You must understand, choosing to be real in a world full of roles is revolutionary. But it's also lonely. You'll lose people who were only connected to your mask. You'll lose opportunities that required you to compromise your voice. And at times, you'll even doubt your choice. But what you gain is far greater: a self that is whole, a life that is not borrowed, and a heart that doesn't need disguises to be loved. They wore masks because they couldn't face their own reflection. You showed them what was possible without one. That seed was planted even if they rejected it. And though they may deny it now, the truth you lived will echo in their conscience long after the applause for their performance dies out. You didn't lose them. They lost the chance to live without the mask. They lost the person who was willing to love them without one. And that's not your failure. That's their choice. Life has a way of revealing what words can't conceal. It's easy to talk. Words come cheap in a world where speaking is often more valued than meaning. People can say the right things, wear the right expressions, mimic empathy and project virtue. They can build a narrative that sounds convincing to others and even to themselves. But reality doesn't respond to words. It responds to character. You watched this firsthand. You saw people who were skilled at speaking without ever truly communicating. They used language as camouflage, not as connection. They told stories that made them appear innocent, humble, or wise, yet you knew something wasn't right. The words didn't match the energy. The tone was polished, but the actions were hollow. And for a while, they got away with it. For a while, they even looked like they were winning. That's the painful part. When you see someone who has done harm walk around with their reputation intact. When you watch people admire the very ones who wounded you, all because those people are better at performance than you are at pretending, it can feel unjust. It can feel suffocating. But here's what time always proves: life does not honor the mask forever. What's hidden will be revealed. What's fake will fall apart. And what's real, though buried, will rise. You don't need to expose them. You never did. That was never your burden to carry. You felt the weight of the truth because you were the one who lived it. But life has a way of leveling things in its own time. It is slow, sometimes unbearably so, but it is precise. You see, people can craft a persona. They can convince others, but they can't deceive time. Over time, inconsistencies show. Patterns repeat. Reputations that were carefully built on deception begin to erode from the inside out. The same charm that once protected them starts to betray them. The same carefully selected words begin to ring hollow. The people they fooled begin to sense something's off. And the cracks once invisible start showing up in conversations, in behavior, in silence. That's how life unmasks people. Not all at once, but in the small, subtle ways that are impossible to escape. You must understand, truth has gravity. It pulls everything back to itself. Lies might orbit for a while, spinning stories, attracting attention, creating confusion. But eventually they run out of fuel. Eventually they come crashing down. And what remains is the weight of truth, unavoidable, undeniable, unshaken. That's why you must remain grounded in your integrity, even when no one sees it. Even when it looks like they're thriving and you're left behind. Appearances can be misleading. They may look like they're ahead, but you're not running the same race. You're not chasing the illusion they are. And the further they run from reality, the harder the impact when it finally catches up. You've likely been questioned, maybe even doubted by those you thought would stand with you. You may have tried to explain your side, to give context, to speak your truth. But sometimes the more you explain, the more exhausted you become. And the more they lie, the more polished they seem. That's because liars rehearse. Honest people don't. Honest people speak from pain, not from performance. And pain is not always eloquent. Pain is raw. It's sometimes misunderstood, but life understands, and life responds in ways that go beyond words. Eventually, their words won't be enough. Eventually, they'll be held accountable not by you, but by the very reality they tried to twist. You'll see it in how their relationships start to crumble, how trust becomes scarce, how peace escapes them no matter how much they pretend. Because living a lie has a cost. It drains the soul, it robs sleep, it corrupts joy. And on the other side, living in truth, even when it's painful, creates something solid, something lasting. You may not have had the last word, but you're building a life where your actions speak louder than anything they ever said about you. You may have walked away feeling unheard, but you walk in alignment now with your values, your spirit, your peace. Let them say what they want. Let them continue their performance. The show ends eventually, and when it does, the audience starts to ask questions. Questions they never had before. Questions about motives, about contradictions, about consequences. And in that space, truth has its stage not through your revenge, but through their reflection. Life doesn't need your anger to expose a lie. It just needs your consistency, your refusal to play the same game, your choice to heal instead of harm. That is what brings truth to the surface. You may never get an apology. You may never hear them admit what they did. But one day they will have to face the reality they created. One day their own life will speak louder than their excuses. And on that day, the truth will be its own testimony. You don't need to defend yourself anymore. Life is doing that for you, and it's doing it the one way they can't escape, by letting their own actions speak. Your pain was not a punishment, it was proof. There's a dangerous lie that often creeps into the hearts of those who've been deeply hurt. The idea that their pain is proof of their inadequacy, their flaw, their failure. When people leave you, betray you, or mistreat you, it's easy to look inward and begin questioning your worth. You start thinking, maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I had just been less emotional, less open, less real, they would have stayed. But let's make something clear. Your pain was not a punishment. It wasn't life condemning you. It wasn't a sign that you were too broken to be loved. It was, instead, the evidence that you were brave enough to show up real in a world that's addicted to pretending. You dared to love without conditions. You offered your vulnerability as a gift, not a weapon. You showed up without a mask, believing others would meet you with the same honesty. And when they didn't, when they took that truth and mishandled it, it didn't mean you were wrong to give it. It means they weren't ready to receive it. We tend to associate pain with guilt. If something hurts, we assume we must have done something to deserve it. But emotional pain, especially the kind caused by betrayal or abandonment, often says more about the person inflicting it than the one receiving it. It doesn't mean you were unlovable. It means they didn't know how to love on the level you offered. You see, the deeper your heart, the more likely it is to be misunderstood. People who live on the surface aren't comfortable with depth. And so, when they come across someone who speaks with emotional clarity, who asks real questions, who expects honesty, they retreat. Not because you were wrong, but because your presence demanded a level of integrity they weren't prepared to deliver. And that disconnect, that's where the pain lies. But again, that pain is proof. It's proof that you weren't playing a part. You weren't pretending to be someone you weren't. It's proof that you gave something genuine, something that had weight, something that had meaning. And when something meaningful is lost or violated, it hurts. Of course it does. That hurt is not weakness, it's confirmation that your heart still works in a world that tries so hard to numb itself. When you look back on those moments of emotional betrayal or disappointment, it's tempting to want to erase them, to wish they never happened. But those very moments built you, they shaped your insight, they sharpened your discernment, they gave you the eyes to see through what others miss. That kind of clarity isn't cheap, it's paid for in pain. It's also what makes your presence powerful now. You're not naive anymore. You're not easily fooled by appearances. You don't chase after charm or charisma the way you once did. You've learned to feel beyond what's said, to read between the lines, to hear what's not spoken. And that intuition, that sensitivity, it's not a curse. It's a superpower. The pain that once broke you became the reason you woke up. You started to realize that people's inability to value you wasn't a mirror of your worth, it was a reflection of their limits. Some people can only meet others at the depth they've met themselves. If they've never done the inner work, if they've never faced their own wounds, they won't know how to hold yours. And that's not your fault. That's not your burden to carry. Your healing journey, as hard and heavy as it's been, has made you more human, not less. You now carry compassion where bitterness could have grown. You offer understanding even when you receive silence. That's what strength looks like, not loud, not aggressive, but deeply rooted in quiet resilience. And here's the most important part: your pain has now become your clarity. You know what you deserve. You know what's real and what's performance. You don't chase illusions. You've learned to wait, to watch, to listen. You've grown into someone who would never do to others what was done to you. That is not weakness. That is transformation. The people who hurt you may never acknowledge the depth of the damage. They may never come back with apologies or closure. But they were never meant to be the ones who define your healing. That healing is your territory, your responsibility, and your triumph. Every tear, every restless night, every moment of confusion, it wasn't for nothing. It built something in you that can't be faked. It taught you how to rise even when your heart was still bleeding. That strength didn't come from comfort. It came from walking through fire and not letting it turn you into someone cold. You didn't become bitter. You became better. Your pain was not a punishment. It was proof that your heart was alive, open, willing. Proof that you were never afraid to be real, even when others weren't ready for it. And now life is beginning to reflect that truth. Slowly, subtly, but surely. The masks are cracking. The roles are collapsing. And everything that was once hidden behind performance is starting to come into the light. You carried the weight of what others ran from. And now you carry the wisdom they'll never understand. You stayed true. Now life is unmasking the lies they hid behind. There's something incredibly rare about someone who refuses to compromise their authenticity, even when it costs them connection. In a world where many adjust themselves just to be accepted, where masks are worn like uniforms, you made a different choice. You stayed true. You didn't bend your truth to keep people comfortable. You didn't water down your standards to maintain peace. You didn't wear a disguise just to avoid abandonment. And yes, it cost you. It cost you people you loved. People who once held your hand but couldn't handle your honesty. People who said they cared, yet turned their backs the moment you stopped shrinking to fit the version of you they were comfortable with. You lost relationships not because you were wrong, but because you were no longer willing to live in pretense. You were no longer interested in pretending things were fine when they weren't. And that kind of truth makes some people deeply uncomfortable. But here's what you need to remember. Truth always echoes longer than lies. The things people say about you to defend their actions, the stories they construct to make themselves look better, the narratives they feed to those around them, all of that has an expiration date. The performance will end. The applause will fade. And when it does, what's real will be all that remains. The ones who painted you as too much or too intense were never judging your character. They were protecting their own masks. They needed the lie to live longer than your truth. Because if your truth stood, if your honesty was left unchallenged, it would expose everything they were trying to hide. So they did what many do when threatened by authenticity. They flipped the script. Suddenly, you were the villain in their version of the story. Suddenly, your boundaries became cold, your honesty became harsh, your self-respect became pride. But what was actually happening beneath all of that noise was this: you were becoming untouchable by manipulation, and that scared them. Still, you stayed true. You didn't fight dirty. You didn't retaliate. You didn't gather people to your side to try to prove a point. That's not your way. You knew deep down that the truth doesn't need a stage, it just needs time. And time has a way of exposing what people thought they buried. Time pulls back curtains. Time reveals the cost of deception. Time shows who was pretending and who was patient enough to wait for real things to unfold. Now, slowly but surely, life is unmasking them. People are beginning to see the cracks, the inconsistencies, the way their stories shift depending on who's listening, the way their charm covers a trail of broken connections. It's becoming harder for them to maintain the illusion because lies take energy to uphold, and over time, that energy runs out. You, on the other hand, are not drained. You are not running from the past. You are not revising history. You are not afraid of being seen clearly. That peace you feel, that quiet strength, it came from staying true when you had every reason to give up and join the game. And now, the difference is visible. You walk without heaviness because you're not carrying secrets. You speak with clarity because you're not editing yourself to please anyone. You rest at night not because everything is perfect, but because you're not pretending anymore. That kind of peace can't be bought. It can't be faked. And the people who left you because they couldn't handle your light, they're feeling the weight of the shadows they chose. It may not happen publicly. You may never get to see the exact moment their mask falls. But somewhere behind the scenes of the life they tried so hard to present, the truth is catching up. And when it does, they'll remember you not just as someone they lost, but as someone they never truly understood until it was too late. They'll remember how you offered them something real, how you didn't need to perform to be loved, how your silence wasn't weakness, it was strength restrained, how your departure wasn't revenge, it was dignity walking away. You gave them a chance to meet you at the level of truth. They declined, but the story didn't end there, because the truth has a long memory, and life honors it even when people don't. So don't doubt the power of staying true, even when it's lonely. Don't regret being real, even when it left you empty-handed. What you kept, your integrity, your self-respect, your clarity is worth more than what you lost. And as life continues to unfold, the contrast between who you are and who they pretended to be will only grow clearer. The same truth they tried to silence in you is now the mirror life is holding up to them. You didn't expose them. You simply outlasted the lie. And now, the truth is doing what it always does, rising quietly, consistently, and without apology.